And today I'm here to introduce our speakers for the first annual T.L.Saaty Decision Making Hackathon. So today we have 4 gentlemen, all of whom are Pitt alumni, here to present to us. We have asked them to share a little bit about their Pitt experience, as well as their roles at Microsoft, but probably most importantly, to share some of the decision-making problems that they've encountered in the past or anticipate encountering in the future. There will be time for questions after each speaker, if I have the process correct, and the order of presenting is random, so there's no specific order. So if everybody's ready, first up is Chris Jones. I got my notes for this. All right. Chris is General Manager for Business Applications at Microsoft Midwest region. Chris is an experienced enterprise sales leader with 20 plus years of solution selling experience, including 18 plus years at Microsoft. Currently, Chris is the lead for business applications business, which includes Dynamics, Power Platform, LinkedIn, and other processes for Microsoft's Midwest enterprise business. Chris's previous roles at Microsoft include Director of Enterprise Sales for Manufacturing, Regional Director for Modern Workplace, and Area Sales Director for Corporate Accounts. Chris earned his MBA here at CATS back in 2002, according to our records. So he's here for his 20th anniversary. So everyone, please give a welcome to Chris Jones.
It's an honor to be back. It's been 20 years. I didn't realize that until today. Time flies when you're having fun. Great to be here with everybody today. Let me just make sure that this is in there. Okay. I want to start with, I'm sure everyone knows about Microsoft, but I thought it'd be good to just give a couple quick minutes overview and what we've been up to lately. A couple pictures for you to look at here. In the upper left is a picture of Bill Gates and Paul Allen, the 2 founders of Microsoft. Paul Allen just recently passed, I think, over the 2 years ago. Just below that picture is the infamous picture with the founders of Microsoft, the original employees of Microsoft. Upper right, Steve Ballmer, and lower right, Bill Gates with the first version of Windows that was shipped. Satya Nadella is our current CEO. There's only ever been 3 CEOs for Microsoft. We're sort of like the Steelers in that way. We like to stick with the leader and stay with them. And I really like this picture. It was when Satya Nadella was announced, and all 3 CEOs were there together on stage. Bill Gates was the CEO up until 2000. Handed the reins over to Steve Ballmer. They both went to Harvard together and dropped out of school. They had a competition to see who could get better test scores without ever showing up to class. That's how smart they were. He was the CEO until 2014 and then handed the reins over to Satya Nadella. And under Satya Nadella, we have completely reinvented Microsoft. And it's a much different company now than it ever has been. And I'll go into that just a little bit more. I wanted to start with the mission. I think Microsoft's mission is one of the best mission statements in the world of any company. And it's to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. And part of that was grounded in Satya Nadella's son, who's disabled, and who actually just recently passed here this past week. So there's a big push within Microsoft to empower those, especially with disabilities, to make sure that they have equal access to opportunities to learn and equal access for opportunities in the workplace and in the world. So I thought this was an interesting stat. This shows the largest companies in the world in each of the, past 3 decades. And you'll see GE is top in 97 and close to it in 2007. And then you'll see in 2017, there's a lot more technology companies. Anybody want to guess what the top 5 are now in the year 2022?
Same.
There's one sleeper in there.
Apple, Amazon, Alphabet.
You have most of them. The second one is going to be a shocker to everybody. It's an oil company in Saudi Arabia, which is the second largest. But if you look other than that, it's Apple and Microsoft are the two tech companies that are over $2 trillion in market cap, followed by Alphabet, Amazon, and Tesla was number 6. I put that in there because I thought that could be very, very interesting. So a couple fun facts. Microsoft was founded in 1975. I was hired in 2003. My badge number, your employee number, was 213,508. I just asked someone we hired last week. That number is now over 6.2 million. So if you think about anybody that's ever been hired at Microsoft, and some have left and gone on to other things, it goes to show you the amount of growth. There's 9 Chris Joneses that work for Microsoft. So we share each other's email and sometimes expenses and everything else. I think he reached out to 2 or 3 of them before he found me. So I always get a kick out of that. We've seen a lot of growth in the stock and the market cap, and also the number of employees have grown quite a bit as well too. And before I get to the hackathon topics, just a little bit about my background and how it pertains to Pitt and my experience. So I started out of college working for a company called ADP and decided to go back to get my MBA evening while I worked full-time here at Pitt, and had a great experience. It was long. It took me 3 years to get my degree, but the benefit was I was able to keep working, and my employer paid for 2/3 of my degree. And one of the things that came out of that is I became friends with someone by the name of Paul Plisateri, who was a fellow student. Paul, shortly after he graduated, got a job at Microsoft, and through networking and the friendship that I had joined, he referred me to Microsoft, and that was in 2003. And so it's been almost 19 years later, and I'm still here. So I can say that you have a great opportunity while you're here for a couple things. One is to learn and help you think differently, but secondly, to network with people. And you'll be surprised to see many of the people that you become friends with here, you may be able to connect with and stay connected with in their career, and you never know where your paths may cross again. So in my time here at Microsoft, I think about 8 of those years I was in various individual contributor roles, always in sort of frontline sales roles within Microsoft, and then 10 of those in various leadership roles. And have been very fortunate to have a career where I haven't had to move. I've stayed here in Pittsburgh this whole time. Oftentimes you'll find in different companies that you've had to move up, physically in a number of places. Especially now after the pandemic, it sort of doesn't matter where you live, which is good. As long as you have a good internet connection and a quiet place to work, you can work most anywhere. But it's been a great ride. With Microsoft, I would say the transition to some of the hackathon topics, probably the first 8 to 10 years at Microsoft, I was primarily responsible for selling to enterprise customers all that Microsoft had to offer, everything from Windows to Office to Exchange, SharePoint, SQL Server, and it was all on-premise software where our customers would buy the software, buy the hardware, install it. They'd have physical data centers. They'd be responsible for the security of those data centers. And essentially, as new versions of all of our products were released, our customers were then responsible to upgrade from one version to the next. Over the past 10 years, there's been a big explosion in cloud computing. So basically, all of the things that Microsoft had to offer and sold to our customers basically transitioned to, you still have the ability to run them on-premise in our customer's environment, but you can run it in our cloud. So we have built massive data centers all over the world. I think, John, you may touch on some of this a little bit later. And basically, we're able to run a very, very cost-effective, highly efficient cloud service. And basically, our customers, for lack of a better term, outsource some of these functions to Microsoft. So no longer do they have to administer email, as an example, and Exchange in their environment. It's done by us in our cloud. They have the ability to provision some of the services. So over the past 10 years, that's where I've spent my time in various forms. One really good example is Exchange. So Exchange is a lot of what most enterprise companies use for enterprise email. So instead of our customers running it on-premise, now it's Office 365. For those of you that are familiar with Office 365, you have the ability on your mobile phone, on your laptops, whatever the case might be, to access that, and it's all delivered and powered by Microsoft Cloud on the back end. So there were just a couple hackathon topics that I wanted to throw out there, but before I do so, any questions so far? I'll save some time for some questions towards the end. There were three topics that I wanted to throw out there for food for thought in your hackathon. The first is just around what I've done here over the past 10 years or so is helping customers understand the value of moving towards a cloud-based offering as opposed to sort of having the control of managing it in their own environment. And in my mind, it comes really down to trust. They have to be able to trust that we're going to be able to work with them in a secure manner. Privacy is another important one, and efficiency. And a lot of it is being willing to give up control. This is an ongoing process. I would say almost all of our large enterprise customers, Fortune 500 companies, for the most part, have migrated over to Office 365. Another big solution area you may have heard of is Azure. Azure is, we call it the world's computer. It competes with AWS, with Google's cloud offering. And basically, it's another big growth area for Microsoft. The area that I'm in is our business application space, which basically is all of our Dynamics offerings. So if you've heard of ERP systems like SAP and Oracle, if you've heard of CRM systems like Salesforce.com, we have offerings that compete in all those spaces. LinkedIn is also a Microsoft property as well, too. So there's capabilities within LinkedIn that help enable our customers reach out to their customers more effectively and grow their business that way as well, too. So I bring up this first one, decisions for on-prem to cloud, for you to maybe just think about if you were running a business or starting a business, what are the pros and cons around leveraging a solution and you want to have control over managing it on-premise versus what are the benefits of moving to the cloud? And it's everything from cost to number of employees and headcount that you might need to run an organization and to run an application, to security, to where your data resides. These are all common decisions that there's a number of compliance considerations to make sure we're adhering to rules and regulations such as HIPAA, GDPR, which is the European Union rules around data privacy. So those are all some of the things that go into making that decision. The second is around privacy. And I'm going to read a couple of things from a book from Brad Smith, who's our chief legal officer. And there's a book that I'm going to leave here for you to reference called Tools and Weapons. It's an excellent book. It talks about the challenges and the opportunities that technology presents in our world today. I'll just read something here real quick. So this is a fundamental fact of life that everyone who works in the tech sector needs to remember every day. We're fortunate to work in one of the most lucrative economic sectors of our lifetime, but the money at stake pales in comparison to the responsibility that we have for people's lives and freedom. For this reason, every decision to put a Microsoft data center in a new country requires a detailed human rights assessment. I review the findings and get personally involved wherever these raise concerns, especially when the final answer needs to be no. There are countries where we have not and will not place data centers because the human rights risks are too high. And even in other nations where risks are lower, we store business but not consumer data. But in place in additional safeguards and remain vigilant. New demands can suddenly create quiet and dramatic crisis. There are days and nights that test the moral courage of those responsible for the cloud. And I think that that's very relevant today in what's going on with the global situation that we have with the war. And there were a lot of headlines around cybersecurity threats that happened in Ukraine above and beyond the physical attacks that are happening. So privacy is something to keep in mind. And I want you to think about privacy, and this could be another topic for you to think about in your hackathon. Think about how, whether you knowingly or unknowingly are sharing private information about yourselves and what is being done with that data. This is a place where Microsoft takes a very principled stand on privacy. In fact, we sued the federal government to make sure that we could retain the rights for individuals when subpoenaed by the government. So I bring this up, and I'll give you an example from my own life. I sleep in a sleep number bed. When I wake up in the morning, it reports back to me my heart rate variability, my blood pressure, how long I slept. What happens to that data? Then I get on my cell phone and I might look at the news, or I might look at a social application. What happens with that data? Who's using it and for what purpose? You'll get in your car and start driving down the road and you might use Waze. It's picking up how fast you're driving. Are they using that data in some way, shape, or form? I could keep going on and on. So there's a number of instances where you might in your life, whether you realize it or not, are providing information. You do a search in Google as an example. They're going to start to deliver customized experiences based on your personalization. So think about your data, your life, and the data that comes from it, both personally and in your professional life, and think about the implications of that. And as you're doing your hackathon, that might be another topic for you to consider as well, too. What are the implications around how companies can, will, and should use your data for their benefit or for yours? So that was the second one. The third one is artificial intelligence. And I don't feel like that artificial intelligence has been very well explained. I found a couple definitions from this book that I'll read that I found to be very, very helpful. The first one, AI is a computer system that will learn from experience by discerning patterns in data fed to it and thereby make decisions. AI is the study of computational mechanisms underlying thought and intelligent behavior. And the ability of a computer to learn from data and experience and make decisions. The essence of these definitions is AI is based on two fundamental technological capabilities: human perception and human cognition. So if you think about artificial intelligence, think about it in terms of how it can be used for the good and how it can be used for bad. It's called ethical AI. And again, it's something that for you to consider as part of your hackathon. I'll give you some examples of where it can be used for good. We have manufacturing customers that have shop floor equipment with sensors on all their machines, and they're able to take the data off of those sensors, feed it into a computer, do machine learning, and optimize the performance of those machines. It can also be used to predict when a component may fail and give them the ability to do proactive service on a machine or an equipment, and then also hopefully fix the issue before it breaks, causing more loss, right? So that's another example. Another example of artificial intelligence and machine learning, our CFO, Amy Hood, implemented machine learning and artificial intelligence to improve the collection of the forecasting process within Microsoft. So what used to take three weeks was brought down to a couple hours. And then it was just a matter of manually checking the work of what the systems could do. So there's a lot of examples of where artificial intelligence can be used for the good. You've probably seen some movies where they outline how machine learning and artificial intelligence can be used for the bad, where robots are going to come and take over the world. So there's plenty of examples where artificial intelligence may not work properly, and the data and the signals that send off don't lead to what would be considered rational with human thought. So again, think about artificial intelligence in a way that how can it be used for the good, and how can we think about ways in which we can avoid negative consequences of artificial intelligence. So those were the main topics that I had. Any questions on any of those 3 topics, or Microsoft, or my background?
I have a question. It's about the privacy thing. I understand you don't want data going from individuals out. What about countries that decide to prevent information coming in? Say, we don't want people in Russia to get information from Skype or someone, whatever. What about that?
I'd be interested in any of you, your thoughts chiming in. Do you want to start, John?
You'll address it later.
Well, actually, not address it later. It's a really hard problem. What you've described, and we have to deal with geopolitical boundaries and how we capture, retain, and process and destroy data, right? All of those pieces go into it.
And how do you keep customers if you're refusing to do what they want you to?
Yes, and so when Chris initially started, he said one of the things for using services or building services to be successful is you have to build trust. And I'm not saying trust, right? I'm not saying trust me like without it, right? It needs to be contractually put. There needs to be processes that are validated and audited. And those are the things that we do. We explicitly state within our terms and conditions that we will not use it for commercial purposes, right? And so that data is used for maybe improving the service that's there, but not to sell. And
it's so hard to know what truth is. As Ellen was talking about decision making, she said it's a perspective. If I want to evaluate whether the menu is good or bad, that depends on what I want. You know?
And what you like. I do, right?
And so truth is.
Well, each country is very different. I mean, if you look at how we operate in China, it's very different than how we operate in Germany. It's very different than how we operate in Russia. It's very different from how we operate in the United States.
You still operate in Russia?
And so you bring up a very good point. For cloud services that we deliver in China, it's a sovereign cloud. It is operated by a Chinese entity. We provide the technology know-how, and it is run by a Chinese company. In Germany, it is run by Deutsche Telekom. In the United States, we have a sovereign cloud for the federal government. And so there are these divisions that happen to address challenges like what you're talking about. On the consumer side, it's a little bit more of a blend. And you'll see that across all technology services, as there's just a desire to get as many people using the service, and it may not have that same regulatory kind of adherence to it.
Good question.
Yes, Chris. I have a question about the AI aspect. As an engineer that works with some machine learning, where do you think Microsoft's role will be in AI? Like your industry perspective, what would be the thing?
It's going to be very interesting to see, because 5 to 10 years is so far out in terms of technology, and I think what you're seeing are, with advancements and improvement in quantum computing. I'm not sure if you've read much about quantum computing.
I just know a little bit.
Me too. You probably know more than I do, and you probably are deeper in the AI space than I am. But things are happening so quickly. I think that to the extent that the large tech companies that are deeply involved in this space look at it through an ethical lens. And when I say the large technology companies, all the ones that we talked about, right, on the largest companies, and you could even add to that companies like Salesforce.com and some others. So there are some that are really squarely focused on the enterprise space, and then there are some that are focused on more the consumer space, and then there's a blend of the two. A good example might be my grandkids will probably never drive a car, so we're pretty far along around autonomous driving, and then you think about the grid that exists in there. Where we need to get the nuances right is when there's a car driving down the road and a deer jumps out in front of you. What decision does that computer make versus a child on a bike? And a computer has to make a decision as to whether to hit whether to hit a deer or whether to go into oncoming traffic on the other side, right? So I think that those are the next steps that we need to get to in terms of artificial intelligence to really get close to some of the emotional decision making that needs to happen. So I don't know if that helps answer.
And if I could add, there needs to be safeguards in place, because what you've just described as a deer, what if it was someone that was pushing a stuffed animal across, like to try and fool it, to cause something worse to happen, because the intelligence is going to do that. We had an experiment. This is probably about 6 or 7 years ago, where we released an artificial intelligence bot that you could chat with. I don't know if anybody heard of it. His name was Tay. People decided that they were going to talk to it and tell it racist, mean, hateful things. That AI learned to be racist. And we had to shut it down, very quickly, but we learned. We learned the responsibility of putting AI out, that while it can do good, it can help Chris's grandchildren not have to drive behind the wheel of a car and probably save many lives because of accidents that are avoided. That can also be nefarious purposes that it's used for. And so that responsibility is incumbent upon all of us as we think about implementing those technologies. Yeah.
My question was a bit more specific to your role. So when you're talking about onboarding these clients, move from on-premises to cloud, how are you selecting these clients? Is it based on revenue, the industry, employee size, or?
That's a great question. We have different segments within Microsoft, and I think the lines between those segments are a little bit blurry. But I think we have a global group of about the 10 to 15 largest companies in the world that fall into that segment, and the amount of resources that are applied to those groups are immense. Then there's a strategic segment, which is about, in the United States, call it about 350 or so of those customers. And then the enterprise segment, which we're with. I don't know how many fall into that segment, but many of those decisions are based around opportunity, in terms of revenue, in terms of growth. And what's interesting is I think there was a time where some of those decisions were dictated by the number of employees that you had, as an example. But those rules are sort of out the window now, because you might have a very small company that's maybe 50 employees that provides a service that's built exclusively in the cloud and natively on Azure, as an example, that can spend billions of dollars on a utility, right? So, but yeah, that has changed as our business model has changed over time. So, does that help?
Yep, definitely. Makes sense.
And one of the things I'll talk about in my portion, because I want to talk about agility, is that having those rules set that Chris just mentioned, like the 10 or so that are the globals and the 300 or so that are strategic, like you have to be very agile to change, because there are going to be market conditions that come in that say, I need to treat this customer differently. And so the hard and fast rules do not last very long.
Okay, any final questions for me before I hand it to John? Another one?
Yeah, it's over there.
How Microsoft deals with the malware attacks which happen now and then? Because as you said, you are a global and your cloud is global for many customers. So not from the Microsoft perspective, but from the customer's perspective, how they, because every customer will be worried about the malware attacks,
Yes.
which is not in their control, but it is something in your control and your responsibility to tackle and terminate. Because there was a news last month that Microsoft and they actually stopped our biggest malware attack of the decade.
Yes.
So what was the process behind it, how you did, and what was the revenue?
Yeah, I might ask for an assist here.
Yeah, so I can help. So inside of Microsoft, we have about 8,500 security professionals that work in a variety of roles. So we have teams that protect Microsoft from a corporate perspective and the employee workforce. We have teams that are protected in cloud environments like Office 365 and Azure, as well as Xbox Live and other things. We have our Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, which is a group that tracks the different nation state actors, the different cyber criminal ransomware groups, even some private sector offensive actors. And a lot of the information and a lot of their eyes have been focused around what's been happening in Ukraine really since January. And seeing how cyber attacks were used really before the Kinetic War started in there. And part of Microsoft's mission, particularly when it comes to nation state adversaries, because they're so sophisticated, we really have this 5-pronged approach. But part of it is transparency. And so when we see those things, we take what we learn and we put it in products so that customers can be protected if they're using our security solutions. But we also talk about it. We put blogs out. We document what we see so that even if you're not a Microsoft customer, you can get the benefit of what we learned about these attacks to help protect yourself.
We have partnered with the Department of Defense as well too. So we have a cybersecurity center, which is always a highlight. If you ever get a chance to go to Redmond, where our headquarters is, they've got a red team and a blue team. The red team's on the attack, and the blue team's trying to keep them out. So it's actually pretty interesting to hear some of the information there. So. Okay, well, I think I'm at time for my section. So, John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, everybody.